so far. Despite the odds, we still remember who we are. This path was always meant to be. With open hearts and minds, proclaim our destiny. Starting to hear clearly the whispers of the soul. Looking ever forward with our eyes on the goal.
Salute from the Kingdom of the Son of God in the Coachella Valley. And I'm going to be reading from WarWolves of the Iron Cross. And we're going to be reading from a chapter called The Chosen People. And we'll talk about the nefarious, diabolical ideology of the chosen people that England adopted. And we're going to expose that and how devastating that has been to the whole world. This twin antichrist, England, the UK, Britain, and Judea, the Jews. So again, this is the chapter of The Chosen People. V.K. Clark is the author of the book. First, a quote from Dr. John Henrik Clark. My main point here is that if you are the child of God and God is a part of you, then in your imagination, God is supposed to look like you. And when you accept a picture of the deity assigned to you by another people, you become the spiritual prisoners of that other people. The chosen people. If for centuries the Jews considered themselves the chosen people and their demeanor became audacious and arrogant as a consequence, so have there since emerged a second people also claiming to be chosen. These people also believe they were selected by God to be his tool in the fight against heathens and irreligious people, and as a consequence believe they will be rewarded for this with the riches of the world and pleasures in the afterlife. Yes, the British people were urged to believe that the hand of divine providence was behind the creation and expansion of their empire, which was a supreme force for good in the world, as stated by Lord Curzon in 1894. The Brits have over the centuries made it their unwritten law to justify every political action by reason of humanity or religion. Queen Victoria, in a proclamation of 1858, informed the people of India who had been mistreated by England, quote, firmly relying on the truth of Christianity and acknowledging with gratitude the solace of religion, we disclaim alike the right and desire to impose our convictions on any of our subjects. And so it is up to this very day. Every British offense, every violation of the law, every crime is committed in the name of Christianity. Every British robbery is committed on Christian principles. Queen Elizabeth declared in 1544 that God himself had reserved some countries for English domination. In 1804, William Blake announced on God's behalf, "I gave them the nations of this world," meaning the Brits. The social politician Geoffrey Drake considered Britain's theft of the Transvaal God's gracious gift to the Boers. When in 1914 the encirclement of Germany was completed, England called for a holy crusade against Emperor Wilhelm II, who none considered an atheist. German Junkerism, which is land ownership by petty nobility, and German philosophy, the sacrilege that white and colored crusaders alike aspired to defy. The Bible and Christianity were once again invoked when in 1939 England declared war on our strong, resurgent Germany. At a meeting of the National Association of Congregational Churches on the 16th of April 1940, Chamberlain referred to us National Socialists as wicked beasts in Germany who apparently had closed the gates of compassion on humanity. An English premier like him, speaking of compassion, ought to make even a British Tartuffe. I'll read that again. An English premier like him, speaking of compassion, ought to make even a British Tartuffe blush, especially when considering the multitude of peoples who have been ruthlessly subjugated by England and henceforth enslaved and mistreated. Theodore Fontaine rightly judged the English. They talk of Christ, but they mean cotton. But now we must say they talk of Christ, but mean world dominance. When looking at English history, one cannot but compare the Brits to Jewry. They share the same hatred stemming from the Old Testament. The same prejudice that is common to the Jews is also common to the English. As the Jew believes that Yahweh commanded him to remain a stranger in the countries he has conquered, so is the Brit always the Lord, i.e. master. The stranger in the country he has conquered and is about to suck dry. Thou shalt smite them is the command both the Jews and the Brits follow, each in his own peculiar way, but both in a vicious and merciless manner. The head of the English government made this clear in an address to the Jewish History Society in 1925 when he said, "We, the British, have received the indistinguishable stamp of Hebrew history. We receive our ideals of humanity from the Old Testament and pass them on in a Christian manner." The English labor representative stated in 1928, "We, the English, also live among other peoples, as do the Jews. We are also merchants, and our methods are those of the Jews." Was it chance that created these parallels? Is one conviction, disposition, the natural descendant of the other because both come from the same roots? Since when and how close are Jewishness and Britishness intertwined? So the British proudly have adopted the mannerisms, the morality of the Jews, and they go and use the Old Testament as justification for their genocides on other peoples, just like the Jews. Edward the Confessor expelled the Jews in 1290, but the Jewish problem came to the fore again under Henry VIII, years 1509 to 1547. Under Oliver Cromwell, Jewish influence increased to the point that it was possible for the Jew Manasseh ben Israel, Manuel Diaz Suero, to obtain permission for the Jews to return from banishment. Cromwell thus became the founder of the now flourishing alliance between England and the Jews, which resulted in three things: the establishment of the Bank of England, national debt, and speculation in bonds and shares. So both the Jews and the Brits used the Old Testament to justify capitalism and charging people interest, putting people in debt, while with themselves, Jew to Jew, they don't charge interest. So when you are someone who lends money with interest, you are participating in parasitic Jewish practice. When King Carl II returned to England in 1660, he brought along three members of the Jewish Mendez family who had changed their name to Costa. Needless to say, they became influential members of the royal court and married into English aristocracy. With this maneuver, the influence of Freemasonry increased. Freemasonry is a Jewish satanic religion. They exalt, this is where they exalt the Temple of Solomon and the Lost Ark. But anyways, I digress. Back to the book. With this maneuver, the influence of Freemasonry increased since the kings, aristocracy, and Jews all associated in this organization. Frederick Lewis, Prince of Wales and father of George III, was a master Mason. Henry Frederick, Duke of Cumberland, was elected Grand Master of the Lodge of England and served in this capacity until 1790. William Henry, 1st Duke of Gloucester, was also a member. Sir Robert Walpole, the Duke of Oxford from 1721 to 1742 and First Lord of the Treasury, was one of the most powerful men in England. Jews and Freemasons were his favorites. In his castle in Norfolk, he made the Duke of Lorraine, afterwards Emperor of Germany, Grand Master. Walpole was, as friend and benefactor of the richest Jew of that time, Samson de Rahul Abduente, at the forefront and fight for the naturalization of Jews. So basically, this Duke from Oxford, who one of his best friends was this rich Jew named Samson de Rahul, he basically fought for the naturalization of Jews in England after they had been expelled in 1290. They were brought back in the 1500s, but now he wants to make them, natural citizens of England. It was up, Patrick. Due to his unscrupulous dealings, this Jew had to flee Spain, but then utilized his friendship with Walpole to carry out one of the biggest financial frauds ever. And just to let you know, the Jews have been kicked out of 109 countries, not because they're God's chosen people, but because every country they've gone to, they've set up financial institutions that blood-sucked the life out of that nation and put that nation in debt, and also brought in, besides predatory lending practices, they brought in a decadent culture, which we see now in Hollywood and hip-hop music, in the music industry. Yep, blood libel as well. Due to his unscrupulous dealings, this Jew had to flee Spain, but then utilized his friendship with Walpole to carry out one of the biggest financial frauds ever. William Edward Hartpole Lecky wrote about this enterprise, the South Sea Company, and the history of England in the 18th century, providing us with some insight into English-Jewish corruption. Numerous folks lost everything, their very livelihoods, after having been persuaded by false promises to speculate. But Samson and Walpole left this battlefield of financial transactions as big winners. So basically what they do is they go into a country, the Jews, and they'll set up a banking system, get that country into national debt where before they didn't have it, because those countries had national economies, and then the Jews come in and they set up international capitalism, but they come out the winners, whereas the homeland comes out in debt. And this is what happened in Germany, right, post World War I, before Hitler took over and made the country healthy and good. Okay. Walpole and his Jewish mistress, Hannah Norsa, the daughter of the Jew Isaac Norsa of Mantua, had a daughter who was then elevated by royal decree to the rank of duchess. Sir Edward, a Walpole family member, and his mistress, Hannah Norsa's sister, also had a daughter who later married the Duke of Gloucester, the brother of King George III. So around this time, it's when the English aristocracy and the English royalty was infiltrated by Jews, right? So that explains a lot of the later British Israelism, the British Jewish deception, the British Israelism that a lot of Britons have been ingrained in, that even if they don't believe it, they're indoctrinated from birth that the British are Ephraim and the modern day Jews are Judah. Therefore, it links them together as quote unquote brothers. And this is why Britain is the sword of Judea. Britain and now even America are the swords of Judea, doing the dirty work of the Jews. Okay. Since English kings were often the children of Jewish immigrants, a royal bill was introduced in 1772 declaring that kings agreed to the marriage of the heir to the throne. Compassion for Jews on the part of English kings increased over the generations until it reached its peak under Queen Victoria and Edward VII. He was known as the German Jew because of his politics and sympathies. The aforementioned Samson de Rahul Abduente is an example of how tenaciously Jews work towards achieving equality with the English aristocracy. This Jew, having fled Spain, married a noble English woman and had his son from this union christened. This half-Jew was made a duke, and in 1789, that's the son of Samson de Rahul, he was made a duke, and in 1789, he received a peerage and was allowed to carry the title Duke Eardley. His marriage to the daughter of the Chief Justice, Sir John Eardley, had already elevated him to a prominent position in the English high society. So the Jews infiltrated the English aristocracy and royalty order to make England as quote unquote a New Jerusalem, to then justify their imperialism throughout and their colonization throughout the whole world. When looking closely at English Jewish capitalism, it becomes clear that this capitalist spirit emerged from two components: the Calvinist Puritan spirit of hard work and frugality, with its belief that God is worshipped through work, which is false, because Jesus says to labor for the kingdom, to work. Don't work for the food that perishes, but work for the eternal food, right? Okay, so Calvinism is nothing more than an offshoot of Judaizing the gospel. Okay, so the Calvinist Puritans were Judaizers, right? And again, capitalism comes from Jewish ideology, and the Calvinist Puritans in America were the expressions of Jewish ideological capitalism. So when looking closely at English Jewish capitalism, it becomes clear that this capitalist spirit emerged from two components: the Calvinist Puritan spirit of hard work and frugality, with its belief that God is worshipped through work, and the Jewish penchant for taking risk, for increasing wealth, and of base greed. So Jews are known for having base greed, having bottom feeder parasitic greed. Both components are based in religious dogma. The Puritan, with his peculiar perception of God, was best summarized by the Puritan Baxter. If God shows you a way in which you lawfully acquire more than in another way, without wrong to your soul or to any other, but you refuse this and choose the less gainful way, you cross off one of the ends of your calling and refuse to be God's steward. You refuse to be God's administrator, and thereby refuse to accept his gift to be used whenever he sees fit, right? So they're basically saying that you're obligated by God to make as much money as you can, as long as you don't do wrong to your soul or to any other, so you can be God's steward. Yet Jesus says the opposite. He says, do not build your treasure on earth. Do not labor for the food that perishes. You cannot serve mammon. So do you believe Jesus, or do you believe this ideology coming from Calvinist Puritans who were heavily Judaized, heavily imbued with this English Jewish capitalism ideology, which is antichrist, because it's a debt-based system and a system based on greed? Back to the book. According to this, it is God's will that a man make as much money as possible, not so he can live in luxury, but for the glory of God. This seldom happened, however, since the money was increasingly used for worldly acquisitions. What does the Bible say? It says, hey, good morning, brother Pete, salute. Well, the Bible says that if you reach after wealth and riches, you pierce yourselves with many sorrows. But these Calvinist Puritans, who were heavily Judaized, they taught the Kabbalah, they taught the Talmud and the Zohar in their congregations. They didn't even call their congregations churches. They called them meeting houses, basically synagogues. And so they brought in this Jewish ideology to America. Okay. And it's basically a love of money, base greed, which is a Jewish, it's natural to their biospirit to be greedy, to love money. The Jew, as capitalistic pioneer, also has his roots in religious dogma. The fear of God is implanted into the Jew throughout the Old Testament. The same is the case with Christianity, which emerged from Judaism. Now, I don't agree with that part, but I'm just reading the book. The perception of his personal unworthiness arouses fear of punishment in the Jew. To alleviate this anxiety, the Jew enters into a covenant with God. In the dogma, God with the Jew, and this covenant contains unspeakable commandments and administrative rules, all of which are listed in the Talmud. Now, that definitely is true. Thus, God speaks in the Torah as follows: Follow the Lord thy God, blesseth thee, as he promised thee, and thou shalt lend unto many nations, but thou shalt not borrow, and thou shalt reign over many nations, but they shall not reign over thee. Now, yeah, that's what they're going off of, right? They're using the Old Testament largely out of context to justify their wickedness of subjugating the nations under debt-based capitalism and infiltrating their governments and polluting the culture with decadent Hollywood-type entertainment and music, pornography, etc. Back to the book. All Jewish immorality stems from this religious dogma. If a Jew has obtained 100 pounds sterling by dubious means, Yahweh the righteous will forgive him if the Jew later gives 200 pounds of his ill-gotten gains to charity. The Jew ideology is the ends justify the means. The ends justify the means. But the spirit of nobility. The Christian European spirit is no, you do what's right regardless. The ends do not justify the means. Okay, the Jew created the dogma as an expression of his mind, whereas Puritanism became the expression of the dogma. Both are intertwined, however. The intelligent Brit calls Puritanism the English Hebraism. So the Calvinist Puritans were heavily Judaized. They were Judaizers. They would have been rejected by Paul the Apostle. The intelligent Brit calls Puritanism the English Hebraism. It is no surprise then that the devout Puritan Cromwell became the strongest ally of the Jews. The Puritans endeavored to align themselves closely with the chosen people so as to become part of them. The children were given Hebrew names. Cromwell's soldiers carried banners with the inscription, "The Lion of Judah." Efforts were made to celebrate the Sabbath. An especially diligent Jew traveled to England to search for the ancestry of Cromwell to prove that Cromwell was of Jewish origin. So again, at one time, the Puritans and the Pilgrims kept a Sunday Sabbath, okay? Now, the Lord's Day is on Sunday, but it is not a Sabbath. The early Christians would work on the Lord's Day. But this is, again, nothing more than Judaizing the faith. Even if it's, another day of the week, is still Judaizing. Cromwell himself dreamed of a closer relationship between the Jewish God's people and the English Puritans. The Jewish spirit and Jewish traditions were incorporated into English life. The chosenness of the Jews was transmitted to the English. All of this was supported by misrepresentations of history by Jews. Now listen to this. This is why you have British people that think they're Jews, right? You have British people, every British person I met except for one, if you criticize the Jews, they get triggered and they go into convulsions and they get triggered like woke leftists. This is why. All of this was supported by misrepresentations of history by Jews, skillfully presented to the English populace and believed right up until the 20th century. The English were told that following the destruction of Jerusalem by Titus in AD 70, one of the 10 Israeli tribes had made its way to England and settled there. That 10th tribe then established the roots of the British. Jewish etymologists were successful in proving that the word i.e. Saxon, came from Isaac's son, thus making a connection to the patriarchs. Now, I don't agree with that because the Saxon was just a weapon of the Angles. Saxon came from Isaac's son, thus making a connection to the patriarchs. Before the World War, this science, quote unquote, meaning it's false, false history was even taught at Friedrich Wilhelm University of Berlin by the Protestant theologian of Jewish origin, Dr. Paulus Kassel. The Protestant Reformation was quickly infiltrated by Jews. Quickly, right? This is why the Protestant Reformation, although it did some good at the beginning, it's highly, highly overrated. And in the end, it became a detriment to Christianity. Okay. The above mentioned 10th tribe carried with them a rock on which Jacob, the fraudulent patriarch, I don't agree with that, but just I'm reading the book, right? Had slept which later was used as the cornerstone for Solomon's temple. Now, what's fraudulent is the English version of this history, right? And you're going to see this right now, right? They believe that England, they believe they have a stone, it's called the coronation stone, that was later used as the cornerstone for Solomon's temple. This rock is presently displayed as the coronation stone on the throne at Westminster Abbey. So the royalty of England believe that the queen and or king sit on the throne of David. That is a lie from the pit of hell. It's antichrist, because the throne of David is clearly in heaven, as scripture says. In this, the connection between the Jewish temple and the English crown is recognized. In the opinion of the religious English people, David is himself the ancestor of English kings. That's a lie. Redis Harris tells us in his book, The Lost Tribes of Israel, that a daughter of the Jewish nobleman Zedekiah, Tia Tephi, was able to make it to Ireland following the Babylonian captivity. There she was married to Echid Heramon, and from this union came Fergus More, the king of Argyllshire. And in 834, Kenneth Mac Alpin, one of More's children, became king of Scotland and was thus the ancestor of Jacob I of England. From this, a branch leads to Edward VII, and with that to George VI, the present king. at least at the time of that writing. According to this amazing genealogical research, Queen Victoria is a direct descendant of David, or at least of Tia Tefi, and is therefore of Hebrew origin. So the British believe that their royalty literally sits on the throne of David. That's a lie from the pit of hell. It is antichrist. Okay? So the British are antichrist. Now, I'm not talking about every single British person, but I'm talking any British person that supports this false doctrine of the throne of David being sat on by the Queen of England or King of England. Also, they are antichrist if they believe the modern day Jews are the chosen people and they themselves are Ephraim. Okay? So the queen believes in this miracle and is proud of her heritage, i.e. thinking she's from the throne of the line of David. Rumor has it she keeps a document in her private treasure chest showing her ancestors from the house of Israel without a gap. To honor her ancestor, she gave her son Edward the name David as well. It is therefore understandable that under her reign, Jews were given prominent positions among the Old Testament people, as the English are called. Whereas workers in England suffered terribly, Jews became totally emancipated. So basically what happens is the working class, the lower class of England suffered greatly at the hands of the British monarchy, who delusionally thought they sat on the throne of David and were descendants of David, because these traitors in Britain, just like you have the leadership in Britain, they are traitors to their own people, bringing in third world migrants from Africa and Islamic countries. They basically favored the Jews at the expense of their own people. Okay? Christian oaths, which might have prevented Jews from becoming members of parliament, were abandoned. The most influential administrative posts were afforded to the children of Jewish stock market racketeers. Okay, I'm going to stop there, and I'll read some more. I'm almost done with the chapter, but I don't have much time. I'll finish it later. The bottom line is this. There's a reason why Great Britain pushed for World War I and II. They were doing it on the behalf of the Jews. This is why the UK, the United Kingdom, Great Britain, England, is called the Sword of Judea. The reason why the so-called Jews of today have that homeland in Palestine that was taken from the Palestinians is because Britain decreed it, the Balfour Declaration. Okay? There's a reason why you talk to any British person, if you ever criticize the Jews, they go into convulsions. I've had it happen. LJ, John Arthur, right? Even my friend Natalie from England, Jesus Little Soldier. Who else? Taylor Stewart, Anthony Buzzard's pro-Zionist, Chris, Discover Scripture, right? Power of One. They all get offended and they get triggered when you criticize the Jew. Why? Because they've been indoctrinated from birth that they're brothers with the Jew. And this is why the traitorous British people genocided the Germans in World War II. It was Winston Churchill, that fat slob, that fat war pig, that orchestrated World War II. And the Americans went along right with it, because the British had to then lie to the Americans, well, you're Manasseh, so you're in this together with us. You're Manasseh, we're Ephraim, and they're Judah. And we all got to attack the Germanic people. So they started labeling the Germanic people the Huns. And it's the same ideology used by the Calvinist Puritans, who had this Judeo-bio-spirit and looked at the Native Americans as the Canaanites. It all comes from that pollution of British Israelism. Salute from the kingdom of the Son of God. I'm going to read the rest later.
By insisting he accept their lies as real. By insisting he was never to his people tied. By dictating exactly what he might feel. by permitting faulty joy, but never pride. They believed a lion could be brought to heel, that a lion could from his courage be pried, that the lion himself would learn to kneel, that a lion would not care even if his line died, that the lion himself would accept such a deal. In the end, it was only to themselves they had lied.